This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners all, today we have a very special guest. Some might call him the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, and the end. The master of the universe, the creator of all around us, the Lord God himself. Okay, we don't actually have God on today's panel, which, you probably already knew. But we do have the next best thing, which is Brian Dalton, the creator behind the Mr. Deity web series. And if you're not familiar with Mr. Deity, I want you to stop what you're doing, go on YouTube, look it up right now. It's fantastic. In fact, I consider it one of the major sources of inspiration behind the creation of Brother Jake. My point is, you gotta look it up. It's awesome. Anyway, Brian Dalton recently released a new video as part of the Way of the Mr. Deity kind of spin-off series critiquing the Mormon idea of testimony. And we'll put a link to the video on our website. And in anticipation of the video's release, he graciously agreed to come on the podcast with myself, Randy, Scott, and Bob and talk about his motivations for making the video, his background in Mormonism, the origins of the series itself, and a bunch of other stuff. So, major kudos to Randy for making this happen, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Here it is.
I think a good place to start, just because we do have some Never Mormon listeners and maybe some listeners who aren't familiar with you. Can you give just a quick background of your relationship with Mormonism and your exit?
Yeah, I grew up in a home where my mother was a true believer and my father was a convert from Catholicism. Didn't really buy it, but tried to make peace with it in the family. I wandered around. I wasn't really into it. I was a young rock and roller playing guitar in rock bands. And when I was about 17, I had a teacher's quorum leader who was just amazing. He came after me. He said, I just want you to come to my class one time. And if you never want to come again, that's great. I just want to meet you, know who you were. And I thought, wow, there's an easy out. And I went, and he was fantastic. One of the most charismatic people I've ever known in my life. Funny, charming, smart, and got really into it. Found my testimony and went, into it like very few do. I mean, I'm pretty much one of those people who whatever I do 150%, and I went headlong into it and got very much into it. Did an album of Mormon music, which thank God no one can find anymore, with Lex Diazevedo and Jim Pike, and toured around the Western U.S. doing firesides and that kind of thing. And
what was the name of the album?
Brian and Paul Speak to Me.
Okay,
that's a great title.
That's almost worse than Afterglow, but not quite.
Yeah, it's very close. As what happened to me really was that I started meeting other very intelligent religious people who I came to realize they have just as good of arguments as I do, and sometimes better. And my mind started to open, and then I met people who opened my mind even further, and I learned more about science and how we actually know things as opposed to that burning in our bosom. And it was just a slow grind getting out of it because, I was married in the temple at the time, and my whole life was kind of based around it, as it is when you're a believing Mormon.
How did you slip out of the mission trap?
Actually, that was the album. I was going to a mission in Recife, Brazil, and I was in the missionary training center. I'd been there for about 8 weeks, not 8 weeks, about 6 weeks, and I think about 4 weeks into it, maybe I got word that Lex had heard our demo tape that we'd made and wanted to do an album, and I was just like, yeah, let's do that. And I had a couple really, truly emotionally agonizing weeks about figuring out whether I was going to go on the Mormon or do that. And I ended up coming home and experienced the great shunning of 1984. I didn't realize that I really got shunned. I had no idea it was going to be like that. It was awful.
By whom?
By everyone, by virtually everyone, even my younger friends. You know, it just freaked a lot of people out because I was so strong, you know, in the church at the time, and I think a lot of my friends, it scared the crap out of them. Oh, if he can't make it, you know what? And it wasn't that I couldn't make it, but no one wanted to talk to me about why I'd done it and, you know, and whatnot. And of course, you know, 9 months later when the album came out, everyone's telling me, oh, this was such a smart decision on your part. You're truly led by the Spirit. You're going to touch so many more people with this album than you would have, you know, yada, yada, yada.
Wow. And this was pre-Donny Osmond, right? So you didn't you didn't get to fall back on any sort of example celebrity.
I'm not that old. Jesus Christ.
Well, I mean, Mission Donny Osmond. Isn't the story that, or am I mixing my Mormon celebrities?
He's older than me. He probably would have gone. He probably would not have gone. I don't think
in the
he
70s, I think.
Yeah. This was 1984, and you know, it didn't really bother me one way or the other. It was kind of, you know, I just thought, wow, that's kind of cold, and I thought, well, I'll show them with this album, which I did, and you know, then everyone loved me again. It was, you know, and they loved me when I first came back because up till then I'd been this guy with hair almost down to my waist, you know, in rock and roll bands with the big leather watch, you know, band and super tight pants, you know, big fan of the group Angel and stuff like that. So I looked more like a chick than a dude, as we used to say back in the day. So, you know, it was that, and, you know, a big part of it was I went to work with and for a guy named Dennis Prager, who is a syndicated radio talk show host and a practicing Jew. And
by the way, my dad's favorite radio personality, to my chagrin.
Yeah, learned a lot about. He has gone completely insane in the last 20 years. I mean, truly insane. Pretty much on the right wing lunatic side. I did an entire Way of the Mister dedicated to his unbelievably stupid article called Noah, the most moral story ever told.
I love that one.
In which he admitted basically that God had failed to do that which was morally necessary for nearly 2 millennia, which right there qualifies, in my mind, as writing him off, but apparently not for Mr. Prager. So, you know, it's amazing when you see people that you used to respect just going batshit crazy. It's impressive.
Does he have like a special backstage pass to Christianity? I mean, he almost seems like a Christian apologist to me.
He really is. And amazing considering that you know, Christianity is largely responsible for wiping out 6 million of his buddies back at the Holocaust. I mean, you don't get a Holocaust like that without a good, you know, 2,000 years of systemic anti-Semitism. But you know, I was just looking this up this morning. It's amazing that the Catholic Church only in 1965 decided that they would back off on that idea that, you know, the Jews were responsible for murdering God. That it took them 20 years after the Holocaust is unbelievable. But you know,
Well,
what are you
it's
gonna
right.
do? It's Catholicism.
Well, and it's also right there in the New Testament.
Yeah,
Crucify him, and the curse be upon us and our
children and
children
our children's
and
children.
children's children. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it's hard to back away from that. Just like
that
with
is the problem with these holy books, isn't it?
yes.
Right. That's you really
Someone
paint
is
yourself into a corner.
shit down. Yeah.
Right.
So, tell us about your exits from Mormonism.
Well, the big stuff for me was kind of empirical. I mean, the DNA data coming back was pretty devastating. But I'd been looking more into the archaeology, and people like D. Green who were saying that you couldn't find a Book of Mormon geology. You couldn't find the swords and the chariots and the horses and all the stuff that I mentioned in this episode was pretty bad, and I was still prepared to kind of stay in it for cultural reasons. And the final straw for me was the September 6th. Is it the September 6th? The excommunication of
1993,
including Michael Quinn, D. Michael Quinn, whom to me, if you've got an historian who has written something wrong, you just show him where he's wrong. You don't excommunicate him, and excommunicating him was a Galileo moment for me with the Mormon Church, and I didn't want to have my name on the records. In any way, giving my tacit approval of such monstrous behavior, I found that just profoundly wicked. A person who's telling the truth, and you're going to kick them out. That's wicked.
I was going to say, ironically, he's been vindicated by these recent LDS.org hidden essays on polygamy.
Well, he's an amazing historian. He's brilliant, and he was honest, and screw him for being so. That's just disgusting. It's so disgusting. It still makes me angry today.
Were you at BYU or were you out in the world?
No, I was in the world. I didn't. I literally had one day of college. I went my first day, and after my first hour, I said, "I'm done." I'm not the type of person who does well in a classroom situation. I'm a pretty good autodidact, but classrooms are not my bag. So my education is all pretty much on my own.
Okay, so why don't you tell us about the Mr. Deity project? How it started and all the way up to where it is today.
Yeah, Mr. Deity, I started back. We actually started shooting them 8 years ago, I think this month. I had written the first episode, which you know as Mr. Deity and the Evil, in 2005 after the Asian tsunami that wiped out so many people, and I had a family member who'd lost friends. He was from Sri Lanka. And I just wrote this little musing about, because all the other forms of evil you can kind of get God off of in some way. You can say, well, he had to give us free will. Not that he's not going to take it away in the afterlife anyway, so then what's the point? But that's a whole nother story. You can say that, all the murder and all that other crap, it has to be in there kind of to make this silly plan work. But you can't really make an argument for natural disasters. If we never had a natural disaster, no one would ever go, oh, well, there must be a God. There are no natural disasters.
The earthquakes, floods, tsunamis.
Yeah, I need to have that in.
Well, sir, I actually spoke with the head of R&D myself on this one. Sir, I spoke with the head of R&D, okay? He said if we leave this out, it's not going to affect anybody's free will or
natural
violate
law, right.
natural law or anything like that. And since you're way over quota on the gratuitous pain and suffering...
Here's the thing. If we take it out, it's going to be way too easy for people to believe in me.
No, sir, let me go over the list. Holocausts, torture, and Down syndrome. Those three alone make it kind of hard to believe in you.
No, I don't think so.
Sir, really, if you had the natural disasters, you got earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, you throw in a hard winter or two, no one's going to believe in you.
Sure they will.
No one ever says, oh, well, Bob never, tripped and fell into a void of darkness, so there must be a God. It would just be another thing that never happens to us. Your head doesn't accidentally fall off. It's, there's so many things that could happen to us that don't. Natural disasters would just be another. So I wrote that thing and I kicked it around. I sent it to every actor I knew. I'd made a film several years earlier and gotten people, gotten a pretty wide circle of friends who knew actors, and no one wanted to do it. No one wanted to be pigeonholed. And finally, after a terrible day of work, Jimbo, with whom I used to shoot a lot of video for a medical news and information show, said, why don't we shoot that Mr. Deity thing, and you play God and I'll play Larry, and let's see how that goes. And we had to shoot the first episode 3 times because I was so awful. I'd never been in front of the camera, and I couldn't figure out how to direct and be in front of the camera at the same time. So it took me 3 times. But
did you have any acting experience, like stage or anything like that?
No, not really. But I've seen probably 3,000 films in my time. I'm a big film nut, and I've always been pretty funny, and I have decent timing in that regard and everything. So, and it's even easier to do so when you're editing, when you're cutting. Your timing can get really good, because if it wasn't good originally, you can just move it a few frames left or a few frames right, and there you go. So we've been doing that ever since. We did a season for Sony, and they bought the first season. They co-own it, which is why we don't have a DVD as seasons 1 and 2, because we haven't been able to come to terms on that. And we've been doing it on our own ever since, and that's when I started the begging segments, which have been a real hit with some and the absolute end of the world for others, despite the fact that they're at the end of the show and you can just stop and go on your merry way.
Well, not only that, they're always really clever.
Do you want me to cut?
No, I can just be down here. Oh, you know what? Jeez, people with their dogs, that is so disgusting. Anyway, subscriptions and donations are down. We're going to be fine, right? Things work out for the best. I don't believe that. Neither do you. Come on, that's why you're here. Anyway, whatever you can do, head on over to MrDeity.com and click the donate button.
I try to be, a lot of people write to me saying, "Oh, I like the begging segments more than I like the show," and I say, "Okay, whatever." It's all my attempt to amuse you and get you to go to that page and say, I'll give you $1. The Mr. Deity stuff isn't so much. Mr. Deity is stuff that I really, really care about, and I would be doing it if I didn't make a dime on it. And for the whole first season, I didn't make a dime on it. It's stuff I care about. It's stuff I want people to think about, and I do believe that humor is a fantastic way to kind of plant these seeds and get people thinking.
So how did you end up getting picked up or noticed, or what was your career or just day-to-day life up until you got behind the camera, and then it became successful, obviously, but I'm just curious if you don't mind filling in the gaps.
Yeah, well, I had done graphic design for 25 years. I had a music career early on, which I was kind of off and on, and I would go back and forth to it. But when I was 21 or 22, I started not a graphic design at the time. It was laser typesetting, which then evolved into graphic design as everyone got their own inkjets and laser printers and started doing their own stuff in-house. It looked god-awful, but they could do it in-house and save money.
Right.
So I had been doing that for 25 years. My 2 big clients before Mr. Deity were all the Cap Cities and ABC stations down here in LA and the Clear Channel stations in San Diego. And I was doing well at that. And I decided when I bought a home, I had a friend who had bought a digital video camera and said, now that you have a home, we have a set. Let's write it. Why don't you write a movie and we'll make a movie? And I wrote this thing called Killing the Dream and directed it. And we found some actors here in LA that would come out to Temecula where I lived. And we shot it in, 15, 16 days. And it did really well on the festival circuit. It got, I won one of the festivals we were at. I won the Grand Jury Award. I won a couple Directors Awards. And, at the other places. It played in Europe and
What year was that?
all over. That was 2003. That's where I met Jimbo at one of the film festivals, and who plays Larry on the show. And was offered a distribution deal. They told us, IFP, who I had friends with there, they said, don't take it, just remake it in HD and do this. And Miramax Focus Features liked it, and the guy at Focus Features talked to me for about 20 minutes one day about if I was going to remake it, because they couldn't pick it up. They said it was just too low rent. It was, we shot it run and gun, very, very cheap. And it just looked, like crap. It was just on DV, so you're talking 480 lines per inch.
Right.
And they just couldn't pick it up. And actually it was 360 because we shot it, 16 by 9. But he gave me a lot of great suggestions for the remake, and I rewrote that, and we were going to do that, and we were trying to get a little money together, and that's when Deity took over, and that's been my life ever since. And we're actually talking right now about remaking Killing the Dream. It's called 15 Minutes Later now, and we'd be doing it in 4K now.
Wow.
It's gotten crazy. Yeah.
So can we see the original if we wanted to, or is it shelved somewhere?
You cannot. It never got distributed, and we've thought of putting it out on our own a few times, and we've just held off on doing that just because it would take some work, and I just don't have the time. But if we do remake the movie, we will include that as part of, it's not going to be on a Blu-ray or anything like that. It'll just be download, but you'd be able to download the original too as well.
Cool.
So, could you talk a little bit about the Mr. Deity versus the Way of the Mister? Because it seems like the Way of the Mister is kind of a spin-off from Mr. Deity. Mr. Deity has its own kind of arc and seasons, but Way of the Mister is kind of more you personally, not the character necessarily, right?
Right. Mr. Deity is a show with characters, and there's a cosmography to it, and a the fourth season, we kind of went into the whole backstory of Mr. Deity. It's our prequel season, which turned out to be a disaster, by the way, because no one wanted to watch these things sequentially. I didn't know that at the time, and it pissed a lot of people off. But I still like that season because it sets up the Deity universe, which I think is pretty cool. He's very much like the Mormon God. He is not the God. He is a God. And in his case, he wasn't granted a creation event because he couldn't pass the psych exam, and he goes off on his own and creates a rogue universe, which is kind of my way of explaining why everything's so shitty. They just cut corners left and right. There's a terrible good to evil ratio, yada yada. And they couldn't spend the big money on designing the genitals for the men. They spent it all on the women.
I love that episode where everyone tilts their head.
Yeah.
At the schematic drawing of
that was actually part of the pilot that we wrote for Sony when we were talking with them about doing a TV series.
This is what we've done for the female.
Beautiful. That's just lovely, right?
Nice.
It's kind of floral.
Rosebud.
Lucy, what do you think?
I'm somewhat surprised to say this, but I like it.
And the unit's multitasking?
Right, both the male and female units multitask.
Well, what can I say? I mean, this is obviously a homie, right? I mean, are we agreed?
Oh, yeah, good job.
I love it.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's show us what you got for the guys. I'm excited.
Okay, so this is what we've got for the guys.
Oh, look away, everyone, look away. Cover it up, put it down.
What the hell was that?
What was that?
But the Way of the Mister started because I wanted to be able to say things a little more directly, a little more harshly, with a smile and a wink and a nod still, but I wanted to say stuff that I couldn't necessarily say as the Deity character. And Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron have the Way of the Master, And I thought, well, I'm just going to do mine as the way of the Mister and create my own little videos and put those out. And those kind of take things on more directly, either with, really satire kind of based thing like we did with reparative therapy, which was our first one, or just straight on coming at you for being an idiot, like we did with Mr. Prager and his silly notion about the Noah story being so moral. So it's something I really like. I'm working on one right now, which I hope to shoot this week. I don't know if I'll be able to get to it, about where I admit to being a fundamentalist atheist and what that means. So.
Wow.
Well, you set the bar pretty high with your first way of the Mister, with the reparative therapy.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things I've ever done.
Yeah, whenever I want to show someone who you are and what you're about, that's the one I go to.
Yeah, and I nailed that creepy smile, didn't I?
Oh God, yeah. Did you practice that in the mirror?
I'd like to say I did, but it just comes so naturally to me. It's frightening.
Where did you come up with the name Doubleday?
I don't remember where I came up. It's Doubletree, I think. It's
Doubletree, yeah.
I don't remember where I came up with that, Dr. Doubletree. I think I probably just like the sound of it. I'm very alliterative, and my being a musician, everything's about the way it sounds to me. When I write, there has to be a certain cadence. I don't know if I'm doing iambic pentameter, unknowingly or whatnot, but that's a big deal to me. So Doubletree, I like the sound of that. Just when I remembered, oh, I like that.
I missed the Larry Deity series.
Yeah, I really liked that thing. I thought it was going to be fun because it was little goodies, and it couldn't get legs, and I couldn't justify spending any more time on it. The same with words. I couldn't get any traction on that, and I really love doing words. I would prefer to do words over just about anything else.
So is the Mr. Deity project on hold, or is it done?
No. We've been doing them. What happened was last year, at a certain point last year, the donations got to a point where I had to start taking more outside work just to keep things going for myself personally, and that ended up landing me a full-time job. So I don't get to do them as often as I'd like, but I tried to get people in the last episode to say, give me a little more money and I can take a little more time off and do more of that, because I do have a job where it's pretty flexible. If I want to work less, I can, but quite frankly, they're paying me some decent money and I like making it, but it does eat up a lot of my time. I'm expected, to be here. I'm a VP, I'm a creative director, and so I have to work 55, 60 hours a week, and it's just tough to get the time to do them. We have a big one coming up with hopefully it's going to happen this Friday. We're going to be shooting with someone who I've tried to get on the show for years and years and years, and it's still a little bit in the air, so I'm not going to say who it is, but it's a big name, and the episode is so awesome. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever written. And he loved the idea when I talked to him a couple of years ago about it and really wanted to do it. And we've been trying to get together ever since, and I'm hoping it's going to happen this Friday. So I'm very excited about that.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to have
blue balls.
I'm going to get one with Lawrence Krauss in here very soon too, where we discuss quantum physics, and that's going to be fun because what you can do with quantum physics in a Mr. Deity episode is going to be amazing.
Any way you can book Deepak Chopra?
Yeah, I would love to have him on the show. If he ever wants to come on, I doubt he even knows who I am, but yeah, I would certainly have him on. I would have, there's very few people who I wouldn't have on as long as they wanted to do what I was prepared to write for them.
So I have a question for you in terms of your former Mormon status.
I'm Brian Dalton, and I'm a foreman, and I'm a foreman, and I'm a foreman.
How much do you inject that in all of your different projects? Or do you consciously have in your mind like a ratio where you're like, I don't want to annoy people too much with the whole Mormon backstory, and so it's going to be X%? Or is it just, whatever works in the moment, if it fits for the message you're trying to give in whichever outlet you use it? I'm just curious how it plays out.
Yeah, I don't really have an agenda about my Mormonism. I just kind of, if something hits me and I want to do something about Mormonism, either because there's something going on in the news, or this time I ever since the one that I posted on Mormonism called "Mormonism is Racism," I get periodically people writing me emails and bearing their testimony to me like that's going to do it. And I just wanted to make one finally about it because I was so sick of it, and I'm so sick of hearing the apologetics. That's the other thing that they write me. They write me this bullshit apologetic stuff, like Sorensen's thing about how the Nephite writers didn't write the proper. The guy's translating with the gift and power of God, and he can't figure out horse versus deer. Come on. Get over yourself. It's so absurd, and it's even more absurd, as I mentioned in this video, when you claim to have a prophet of God who could easily just go, okay, what do we do with this? It's so clear. It's such an obvious tell that they've got no one up top who's talking to anyone who is in any way transcendent and all-knowing. You don't have these kinds of problems. Even in the historical context of prophets, you don't have this shit. You don't have prophets hiding out from the federal authorities. If God be for us, who can be against us? Apparently, the U.S. government. That's who. I mean, get over yourselves. It's ridiculous. They claim all this power, and that's their whole thing. Is they claim to be so different. We're so different because we have someone who's talking to God. Yeah, we'll talk. Let's hear it.
Alive and sometimes breathing.
All they can do is, say, oh, we'll back off on this and back off on that, particularly if other groups in our division don't want to play our ball team,
Well, that's something that I've always appreciated about all of your work is that you don't feel the need, like so many critics do, to make a caricature out of it. You do a really good job of sticking straight to the facts but nailing them to the wall. And when you did that video on Mormonism is Racism, you were really careful to say that you weren't saying that Mormons themselves were racist people, but hey, look at the doctrine. This is racist doctrine. This should be changed.
Right. And the fact is that you can't change it, because if you have to change that, the whole religion falls, because they are right. The religion rests on the Book of Mormon, on the truthiness of the Book of Mormon. And if you have to change that part where God turns people's skin dark as a punishment, it's all over. It's just all over. That's the core of the story.
Yeah.
I remember you told me at that gathering we had because of Tyson.
Yeah.
You said the Book of Mormon's idea on dark skin is one of the worst ideas ever conceived by man. And that was the first time I actually put it in its proper context.
I think it's the most, I said in the episode, it's the most racist idea ever. And people have challenged me on that. And I say, name me another idea where you have the all-knowing, all-good God of the universe saying that dark skin is a curse. You
Book
can't,
of Abraham.
I mean, yeah, well, yeah.
But we can probably
just
throw
doubled
those
down.
in the same bin. Yeah.
It's actually a little worse than that. It's because it's so ugly, nobody would want to have sex with them.
Right.
All right.
And this whole stuff about, that I purposely read in that episode the description of how they became after they became dark-skinned, because it's such a hideous caricature of what white people thought of dark-skinned people at the time.
They were full of subtlety and mischief.
Yes, subtlety and mischief, and did hunt. They did hunt in the wilderness for prey. I mean, it's so disgusting. God, how anyone can defend this shit is beyond me.
And then people want to distance it. Oh, hey, no, that's ancient times. But then you go back just not that long ago, 1960. Spencer Kimball gave a talk in General fucking Conference where he talked about Lamanite kids that were adopted or taken in by white Mormon families. Their skin got lighter by a few shades.
Yes, I remember that. I read that when I was researching the piece.
Yeah.
You know, there was so much that I left out that I could have put in there. I could have put quote after quote after quote from these people. They're vile, and you know, look, they were the products of their time. But the problem is, you can't be a product of your time and claim to have a connection with the transcendent being who's all good and all knowing and all that kind of shit. It's one or the other. You're either going to be a product of your time, or you're going to be connected with transcendence. And that's the problem that I have with all of these holy books, is there's just nothing transcendent in any of them. When I was in it, I used to think, you love your neighbor 4,000 years ago, that's pretty transcendent. But then you read Maimonides and you find out love your neighbor doesn't mean love the other guy in the other tribe across the river. It means love the guy next to you. If you need to kill the guy across the river, you're free. You're free to do so. I mean, there's one thing, I can't remember if it's in the Talmud or not, where someone gets off of killing someone because he says, I thought he was a Gentile, and I was throwing a rock at him, thinking he was a Gentile. So, all right, okay. It's okay to kill the Gentile. We thought you were aiming at your fellow Jew. That would have been terrible. It's there's just nothing transcendent in it. And on the contrary, there is so much that is just pure barbaric Bronze Age bullshit. It's just, please, come on.
Yeah, and actually,
don't try to sell me this.
Jesus was actually opposed to washing your hands.
Yeah, and Jesus is the worst of them all. That's the thing. People always look at Jesus and Jesus. Always, blessed are the peacemakers. Blah 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 blah. But this is the guy who basically, I don't think he existed. So I'm not shitting on him for real. I think it's made up after. But the people who followed him are the ones who made up. You don't believe the way that I believe, you go to hell and you burn forever. And what you believe is more important than what you do, which is the most hideous idea, period, in the history of mankind. It's caused more evil and bloodshed than anything. You can't say that what people do is not important in the long run, in the ultimate eternal scheme of things, and expect the world to go well.
Right. Yeah, you set up an interesting dichotomy in your latest one, the Mormon Testimony, of apologetics versus the prophet, and I kind of wanted to dissect that a little bit, because on the one hand I agree, and especially the current prophet Thomas S. Monson, he seems to be like the most lackluster in a while. Correct me if I'm wrong.
All you got to do is look at him.
Well, he's an old man. I mean, I feel bad for the guy. It's like
he's one of those guys, though, that it's like Nixon. Everyone should have been able to just look at Nixon and say, yeah, no. We're not
he's a crook.
Yeah, that's the way I feel about Monson.
Not only that,
Spencer Kimball had a sweet face, a nice look to him. Hinckley, same way, sweet looking guy. Monson looks like schmuck all the way.
He's greasy looking to me.
Those dark, sunken eyes, they just, yeah.
But
it's
feel
not
so bad for them in some ways. Though they're these old guys, and they're just run ragged all the time. I mean,
yeah,
it's crazy.
My biggest complaint about him is he just looks as boring as he is.
What a system of governance that basically those who outlive their peers rule.
Right. There's so much divine hand there, huh? This is how he picks, by killing the first guy. That's how God picks the next one.
Is there any precedent for that, by the way? I mean, that's most times with the stories in the Bible and scriptures and stuff, people die for other reasons, or it's just like this limited context, and we don't have the second generation of apostles in the Bible or whatever. So is this just like a Mormon invention? I'm thinking out loud.
It might be.
Is what a Mormon invention, like the seniority part of it?
Seniority, well, just the way it's phrased is compelling, or it's just making me think about it differently. That God is, cycling through apostles and prophets based on age and when people naturally die, but I guess it's inspirational in another sense, right?
God is actually Jimmy Hoffa. He's a union boss, and it's all based on seniority.
See, that's when I brought it up with some of my more liberal Mormon friends, and I brought up this aspect of it, saying, doesn't this seem odd that it's based on seniority? Like this in the scriptures, it's always like that random guy over there, and then that random guy over there. It's just
right.
It seems more divinely inspired, and the retort that they had was, well, I mean, God knows who's going to die first and who survives who, so playing the long game there, I guess.
This God is just constantly rearranging the chairs. You know what I mean? He's like, we got to move Bobby up here because Tommy's going pretty soon. Let's make sure everyone's in the right place. It's hysterical.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, by the time you outlive all your peers, you're so goddamn close to dementia that you have David O. McKay, basically slowly deteriorating, and then you got all these coups about apostles trying to arrange meetings,
right?
To get the ban on blacks in the priesthood lifted.
Yeah.
And then you have Ezra. I don't call him President, but Ezra Benson, one of the biggest assholes in the history of the modern church. Basically at the point where he's just a drooling meat, sack of meat in a wheelchair, and they still won't release him. I mean, even the fucking Pope can step down.
Right.
But the Mormon Church says no, only God can, touch his icy finger of death on the prophet. That's the only one that can release a prophet.
Right.
And it's just a charade, and it's ridiculous, and it's just a horrible way of organizing an institution.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we kind of went away from the question that you were asking, though, Bob. Did we kind of divert from that dichotomy that you set up before?
Well, I mean, it was a fun diversion, but I'm just wondering, I'm going to ask the age-old question, like, what should the church do? Because farming out apologetics to, the pseudo-intellectuals who are under the guise of being part of a university, or however they frame themselves, I mean, I can see why they do it, because their prophet doesn't have the charisma or the energy to confront real issues and actually prophesy and do the prophetic stuff that we're excited about. Instead, I mean, he has his talks practically rewritten for him from previous times when he was in better spirits and that sort of stuff. And that's just, again, because of the issues we've identified. So it's just like a systematic problem, and the two have to exist, as far as I can tell, for much progress to happen, because to ask for the church to do something more dramatic would be like, asking the church to just say that it's not divinely inspired anymore or something. I don't know. They're sort of baby stepping in the right direction. So I don't want to shit on them too much, even though I totally get why they deserve to be shat on in this case.
Yeah, I'm not with you there. I just want to shit on them.
Okay.
I just want to shit on them because, if you're talking to God, show us the money. I mean, this is not the way it worked when there were prophets before fact checking. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's the thing. You're not acting like a prophet. You're not acting like you have some connection with God. And the story about B.H. Roberts is so valuable, I think, because he's a guy who was there. You can't call him an anti-Mormon in any way. And he was so high up, and he looked at these problems. He said, shit, we need to go to God and figure this stuff out, because this is pretty damning stuff. And when they did that, no one could go to God. There was no one there to go to God and say, these linguistic problems. Well, here's what, there's no one up there that's going to be able to fix it. And to me, if there's no one up there to fix it, just let the whole thing burn. Let's let it go. Let it go, people. Let's make these people deal with reality and move on, so that they don't come to my state again and try to get gay people from achieving the equality guaranteed by the Constitution, which they think is written by Jesus in the first place.
Right.
So,
yeah, but Prager pointed out that equality is not in the Constitution.
Well, no, if I remember correctly, he says that that equality is not an American ideal. That's a French ideal, he said. And he quotes the Declaration of Independence, that where he says our values are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But notice he forgot what came before that. All men are created equal. That's the first part of that line, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator.
So easy to ignore, though. It's not part of the 3 pattern. So
yes, of course, right. If it doesn't fit into your little pattern, we gotta nix it. That was another one of his blunders that is just so profoundly sad to me, because this man is an intelligent man. But I was there. I watched him go from what he used to call himself a passionate moderate to a right-wing nut. I was watching that as it happened, and I know a lot of it has to do with his desire for money, and it's so sad. It was so sad. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just because he's a smart guy and he was a decent guy. And he has since become something other.
Right. So with Mormonism and your approach to it, one thing that I guess maybe we don't say it this way, but I was going to say, we almost pride ourselves on our show of being a bunch of dudes who are trying to figure out life post-Mormonism. And some of that is like, well, what do you do? Like, what are your passions? Where do you devote your time and energy for supporting good causes and stuff, because there's still that sort of residual sense left over. And I'm quick to point out that, I spend more time on myself and play video games and all that good stuff. But
good for you.
I like what you're doing. And I'm wondering, in the context of Mormonism, especially since so many of my friends and family are still believing members, I still struggle with the right approach to it, because I like the proactive nature of awareness building and being witty and I mean, obviously I can't do what you do necessarily. I mean, we do this podcast for fun, but I'm just wondering if there isn't any mitigating, if there isn't any middle ground, or if that's just a false sense of happiness I'm seeking after, of somehow helping the church reform from within, or, finding ways to meet in the middle or whatever. But maybe that's all just bullshit and there's nothing there.
Well, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. I know for me, I just can't tolerate the bullshit. So I have to, the thing is, I was not making, there was a period where, I was trying to figure things out, and I was asking a lot of questions right there in the gospel doctrine class. And, it was not making people happy, and it was not helping their lives in any way. And I knew they weren't people who were going to go, yeah, this is bullshit, I'm out of here too. And, when I left, when I finally handed in my letter of resignation, there was, I kind of thought, maybe even a little part of me hoped that they'd come after me and say, no, don't go. And they said basically, hey, don't let the door hit you on the way out. They were happy to see me go. And, they were happy to see me go because I had reasons that I was leaving. It was not I couldn't stop. It wasn't that I couldn't stop drinking or smoking or had a problem with quote unquote immorality or sex, as they refer to it.
Or were offended.
Or as they don't refer to it. Yeah. I wasn't offended. I just found out that stuff wasn't true. And on top of it not being true, they're trying to control people's lives in a way which they simply don't deserve to do. They don't deserve that kind of control, and take their money. That's not a small thing either. And
right.
I wanted to get out of there. I don't think there's a point in reforming religion. I don't think religion is valuable in any way. I think it's a great detriment to society, particularly nowadays. In fact, that's what my next Way of the Mister is about. And I'm opposed to it. on many levels and for many reasons, but the main reason I'm opposed to it is that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. They had their chance. There was a time when Christianity had so much power. For 1,000 years, they could have made the city of God, this beautiful world, if their religion would have inspired it, but it didn't. What it inspired was the Dark Ages. And we have the same situation going on in Islam now, where a religion has large control of states and can pretty much make its way. And what it makes is an absolute nightmare for its people. And to me, it's so evident that the last 400 years, as we kicked religion to the curb and focused on what we can know and developed a way for knowing what we can know, we have achieved more in 400 years than religion has in 4,000. So to me, that is really the only issue, and I'm not in favor of holding on to something because it gives you great comfort when it's devastating society. And it is, and it has been, and it will forever. I mean, there's just we've got an idiot now in the top Senate seat in the environmental chair, who thinks that global warming isn't happening because God is in control, and yada 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 yada. This is the most crucial issue we've faced in the last 1,000 years, and if we don't do something about it, we're going to be in the shit. Up that proverbial creek without a paddle, and a large number of the people who oppose this, who are deniers, deny it because God sent a rainbow the last time He destroyed the earth, and so that ain't gonna happen. We have I don't know if you've been reading any of this, but ever since the Sam Harris and Bill Maher thing, we have people like Karen Armstrong writing things, trying to tell us that religion isn't violent, that it's been co-opted by politics and culture, and that they've co-opted it and used it for terrible violence and evil. Which, first of all, aside from being bullshit, let's just imagine she's correct. What possible value is there in a thing which can so easily and endlessly be co-opted and turned to the service of such monumental evil? Where is the value in that? And what kind of person knowingly clings to such a thing and recommends it to the rest of us? But out of the mere narcissism of continually needing to manipulate reality in a futile attempt to anesthetize oneself from the inevitability of our own mortality. That's what it's really all about in the end. Right. That's what it's about. I don't know if you've ever read Denial of Death, but that was one of the key books for me that made me realize, oh my God, this is just all about our own fucking nihilism or narcissism. We just can't imagine. I remember Dennis Prager over and over. He said it on the air. He said it in print. He said it to me personally. If I didn't believe there was a God, I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. Well, I don't think you're going to look at that issue seriously then, because what you've done is said, I can't live without this thing, And the real problem with all of these religions, at least the Abrahamic religions, is these books which, you can't get rid of them. You just can't get rid of them. And this is why I'm against religious moderates, because they give cover and they give aid and comfort to the fundamentalists, because we have these people. Even Bill Maher is one of them who's they want the moderates to stand up, the moderate Muslims to stand up. Well, they can't. On what grounds can they stand up and say to these people, you're not doing what God wants you to do? They have the book. They know the book better than the moderates. They can go chapter and verse and tell them, really? Well, He said that He wants us to kill the homosexuals. You're saying He's wrong? You're saying this book is wrong? When you have a book like this, it's just a disaster for civilization, and all of these books have to just go away, and we have to stop taking them seriously. I don't care what kind of comfort they provide you. In fact, it's, ironically, Armstrong's argument it basically shows exactly why Islam is today more dangerous than Christianity, which they always argue against. And that's because Islam is currently entangled with the state and with the political leaders who have, as Miss Armstrong has so eloquently stated, historically been able to use religion to commit great evil.
Right.
And so, and now we're not supposed to attack religion, after. I mean, this is a woman who has now. Oh, how do I say it? There's a thought in my head. It's like we shouldn't care that she's just confessed religion's role as an eternal and reliable ally, of bloodshed and conflict, so long as it brings her the comfort that she wants, and so many others. And we got to stop tolerating these people who say, well, this gives me comfort. So, well, it's wicked. It's just wickedness over and over again. And I don't care how much peace it gives you. I don't care. Grow up, join the rest of us in the real world who have to face death and have to face it with some degree of courage.
Yeah, I hear you, but I think it's like maybe my own flavor of narcissism that makes me love podcasting, because on the one hand I agree with you, but on the other hand I just have this personality. I don't tell these sorts of things to people's faces, strangers, public at large, and especially not my family or friends. So like I always have this dance that I do in life because I have all these different ways I compartmentalize people I interact with, and podcasting is like the most liberating one because presumably right. I'm distancing myself in a very convenient way. So, but am I really doing anything? So that's what I'm wondering is like, to what end?
I don't go out in my personal life making, yelling this stuff at people. I have religious friends. The person that I work with every day is a very religious, devout Catholic. And, we get along very well. Because I'm not, it's not the individuals, hate the religion, love the religious. I'm going to coin a phrase here.
Sounds good.
Yeah. It's I think there are many different ways to go about this. And I do believe I'm a big believer that you need Malcolm and you need Martin. You got to have both. You got to have the peacemakers like Martin Luther King, and you got to have the rabble rousers like Malcolm X. They pull each other nicely back and forth in a nice little tug of war. I'm a little bit more in my public life. I'm a little bit more. If you're just talking to me, not my Mr. Deity character, I'm very much in your face, and I can be very confrontational. But in my personal life, I certainly don't do that. I don't even bring this stuff up with people who I know are religious, because that's just obnoxious. I don't want to pick fights with everybody and come at them all the time. But if they're going to talk to me about it, I generally warn them beforehand. My brother-in-law came back from a mission and he was all puffed up, and he started writing me these letters, and and I said, look, I'll get into this with you, but I'm telling you right now, I know you well enough to know that you are not going to get out of this well if you want to continue your career as a Mormon. And he had the intelligence and the intellectual honesty to say, well, I don't want to live my whole life living a lie. So hit me with what you've got. And I did. And sure enough, he ended up leaving.
Wow. That's.
Well, but I wouldn't have gone after him. I would not have gone after him in any kind of aggressive way.
Right. And that's one thing that I have a hard time grappling with when, like, in this day-to-day interactions with people with religious is I agree with a lot of the points that you made, Brian, but there's this kind of very wide gulf between the everyday mundane aspects of religion that people actually experience, where, in their mind, Mormonism isn't the sum of all these racist comments and the implications of what the Book of Mormon is, and the implications of subscribing to an ideology and what that can lead you to do.
Right.
To them, it's just like, I take my family there, and it's a good, happy place where we're together. And so it's hard to bridge that gulf between the really, really deep seated philosophical problems and absolute issues that Mormonism has, and the day-to-day lived experience of actual Mormons,
which is benign.
Right. Yeah, these people for the most part are benign until they're called upon. You know, they're the sleeping giant that can crush us all. That's the thing that's the thing that's frightening to me. You know, I recognize that Islam is a great danger today, and I think it's a greater danger than Christianity or Judaism in the world today. Not because they're people with brown skin, but because they have state power and they can do tremendous harm, and they live in a culture that's fairly insulated, and they don't have to deal with what Christians and Jews have dealt with in the West with the secularization of the countries in which they live. But I don't think for a moment that if things were to change and Christians or Jews were able to get power, that they would do anything different. They would be doing the same exact stuff. Listen to Brian Fisher. Listen to Pat Robertson. These people are nuts as they come. And should they get power, were they ever to get power, it would be the sign to them that God wants them to push forward with what he really wanted in the beginning anyway. And this is the danger, is because when you have a people who are prepared to follow the prophet, you know, God, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. It's groupthink. It's that sublimation of your identity that Eric Fromm spoke of in his study of Nazism, Escape from Freedom. That is absolutely frightening.
To give an anecdote,
and it's there. It's always there. It's just under the surface, ready to be tapped, just like it was here in California in 2008 when these people came out in droves to deny our fellow citizens their equal rights, their equal protection under the law. You know, it's there, and I saw it. I got a little glimpse of it in 2008, and that's what made me a little more militant. I was pretty much an easygoing guy on this stuff, and that did it for me because it was shocking to me. I couldn't understand how a liberal state, California is as blue as it gets, and it went that way. And I saw what happened. It was Catholics and evangelicals and Mormons coming together to do something truly horrific.
To give an anecdote of what you guys are talking about, and to Jake's question, you know, I've talked about my dad a million times on this podcast. The sweetest guy anyone could ever meet, and a fervent believer. He teaches at the USC Institute, and so one night I was out on, you know, you're talking about the sleeping giant that can come out. I was out in the patio with my dad, and I asked him, you know, he had 7 kids, so there's a good chance one of them would have been gay. What would have happened? None of them did. But I said, hypothetically, Dad, if one of us had turned out gay, what would your advice have been? Would it have been to be celibate the rest of your life? And he said, yep. and so when I think of the sleeping giant, you know, you got this beautiful family, everything's working great in the church, but one of them turns out to be gay, and that kid is crushed, and then the monster comes out, and they foster an environment where the kid is depressed, suicidal,
right?
And that's where the you know, the banality, is that a word?
Yeah, I don't know how to say that either.
The banality of the religion then turns into something insidious.
I think you mean benevolence.
Yeah, that, you know, all of us have.
Benevolence, thank you. Yeah, the benevolence of the religion turns into an insidious maliciousness.
And you know, it's to me, it's because you know, the being that they worship, the book that they revere is ultimately, you know, it's violence and hatred and all of that stuff is part of God's toolkit. You know, it's his big hammer, and he's prepared to bring it out whenever he needs to. And there's no way that you have people revering a book and a figure that much who takes that tact and does so proudly, and in fact demands it of his own people, where you're not going to get that at some point if it becomes possible. And we've done a pretty good job here in keeping it in check. Didn't do a good enough job with W. He was going after those guys in the name of God, and
Yeah, he had a revelation.
But we all of us have what I call skid patches. They're that moments where we're going along and everything's great and great and great, and then someone says X and you go, whoa, 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 whoa. You slam on the brakes and go, what the fuck? And religion just gives you a lot more of those. You know what I mean? There's just a lot more. One of my favorites, by the way, is this Seinfeld episode where he's trying to go out with that girl over and over again, and he finally gets to go out with her, and she ends up saying something horribly anti-Semitic at the very last line of the episode.
Dentist.
Yeah, who needs them? Not to mention the blacks and the Jews.
Whoops! Hold the phone. But there are so many. Depending on how devout you are, there were just so many of those skid patches, and those skid patches create conflict. And the other thing that's so awful about religion is that there is no way to resolve the conflict. It's not based in reason, so you can't reason it out. And what ends up being done is you have to figure out who's right by whose side God ends up on, and that's determined by who ends up kicking the shit out of the other in the long arc of history.
Is it too much though to look for a silver lining? Like using the California Prop 8 example, one could argue, because I can't tell you. I mean, I've heard so many stories, and it's of course anecdotal, and I haven't seen a study or quantified it, but that was the tipping point for so many people to leave the church. I know it doesn't justify it. It's not like, oh, I'm so glad the Mormons, did that. But at least it's compelling to me to see that the worse religion is willing to act in a modern society, the more it has an effect on people's willingness to leave. Or at least I want to believe that, and I want to believe that there's some value there, but maybe I'm just looking for, the good news and the bad. I don't know.
I don't know that it's a silver lining. It's just a line has been crossed with a lot of people. People will tolerate so much, and then, you that last straw, there's always something that breaks the camel's back. And for a lot of people, that was it. And hallelujah. And at least it got them out. Yeah. I mean, it's a silver lining, but I wish we didn't have to have the cloud.
Right.
So Brian, the way the Mister has a lot of episodes on basically debunking Mormonism, and we do this podcast, and you hear the old cliche, you can leave it, but you can't leave it alone. And my wife left the church with me, and she's become an atheist with me, so that's wonderful. But she just doesn't give two shits about Mormonism anymore, and can't understand why I am devoting so much time and energy to thinking about and talking about this fucking stupid religion.
Right.
So my question to you is what is your motivation to do these kinds of episodes like the one you just released?
Yeah.
What is your imagined audience? Do you imagine people on the fence? Do you imagine preaching to the crowd? Is it just cathartic? Do you imagine
I want to educate the people on my own side, because they don't always know a lot about Mormonism. So it's at least partially education. But the Mormon stuff that I do is primarily based on the fact that my life is so much better now. Oh my God. I cannot begin to tell you how much better my life got after I left the church. And religion in general, it baffles me that people can take comfort in it. And it baffles me when I look back on myself that I took comfort in it, because it is so incredibly narcissistic. I'm taking comfort in it that God's looking out for me. And we just did a Deity episode on this, that God's looking out for me and taking care of me, and look at his plan at work, and my life's going great. While meanwhile, children are starving in Africa every day. To me, it got to a point where religion was in no way comforting, because I was well acquainted with evil, and had studied it for quite a while. That was one of the things that I got from Dennis Prager that I'm very thankful for. Even got to meet Yehuda Bauer when he was alive, who probably was the world's leading Holocaust scholar, and just talked to him once about some of the stuff, I just kind of probed him on the worst shit that happened during the Holocaust, and it's you can't even speak it out loud. It's so horrible. And you know, I couldn't take comfort in my own life believing that there was this all-powerful, all-knowing God up there who could have stopped this, who could have, you know, when you think about all the bullshit that why we're here and all this, oh, we're supposed to learn this, we're supposed to learn that, and we have to have our free agency to make the choice. And of course, then you realize that in heaven there is no free agency because there can't be, because that's the root of all evil, basically. So we're all going to be automatons later. If we were all going to be automatons in heaven, why couldn't he make us all automatons here? Or just skip here altogether and just go to the next life with a bunch of automatons. It's so ridiculous, and ultimately I found no comfort in it. I found it more disturbing than anything else, and then I found it even more disturbing what people could be made to do in the name of such a thing, and just on so many basic everyday things in my life, you know, when you're a Mormon, it's particularly difficult if you're a thinking person because you're constantly trying to square the circle. You waste so much mental energy trying to figure out how this all could possibly be true. How could he have found a book written by Father Abraham just so coincidentally and then translated it, and it doesn't work with any of the things that we've actually found now about it? And gee, he did this all before we knew any Egyptian, before the Rosetta Stone was really figured out. And, my brain, if you're a thinking person, it's just one of the most difficult religions to remain a part of and have any intellectual integrity. It was so difficult for me, and my life is just so much better. And I don't think about what my bishop thinks of me. You know, who are these people, the pomposity and the arrogance to think that because you got this job, you know, in this church that you have any right to judge me. It's just so ridiculous. And that we submit to this willingly as members of a faith is just so obscene. And that's my motivation. My life is so much better. I learned how to think better, which has made my life so much better. I don't base my decisions on whether I get a good feeling in the pit of my stomach anymore. And that's been huge for me. I don't think with my emotions. I use my brain, and I've learned critical thinking skills, and I recognize the value of science and, the beauty and the wonder of the universe that is, rather than the beauty and the wonder of this universe that is completely imagined. It's just so much better.
So that's a good segue, Brian, to going into your new video that you just released.
Yes.
The part there that you just mentioned in terms of making decisions based on what your feelings are, that kind of ties into this idea of where Mormons get their testimonies from. So was that basically your motivation for making that new video?
Yeah, and like I said, I was just sick of people writing me and bearing their testimonies to me and thinking that that's in any way going to be impressive to a thinking person.
And like you haven't heard that before, right? Because you've never been in a Mormon church, or you've never experienced any of this. So of course, if somebody bore their testimony, well, I'll drop everything. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite all-time lines is Mark Twain's line about the 8 witnesses, where he says, I could not rest more assured had the entire Whitmer family, testified. It's all the witnesses have the last name of Whitmer, or something like that. And oh boy, he got an entire family to buy his shit. Wow, that is impressive. That you tell me X, Y, and Z, that you feel this way or that way about something, that people think that that's in any way meaningful in any epistemological or evidentiary way is just tells you how far afoot these people are from reality. It's disturbing, but to me I think if you can attack the epistemology of how they think they know what they know, and say, is this really, would you use this in any other way? And, this thing about, it's really true. I mentioned it in this thing. Every single Mormon I knew well had a story of, searching it out and fasting and praying and blah, 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 blah. My partner, Paul, was absolutely certain that he was going to marry this girlfriend that he was going with. And I happened to know some things about her that he didn't know at the time. And I knew it wasn't going to go down that way. So I knew he was completely fooling himself. And I didn't say anything because I knew he was going to find out soon enough. But I knew that that was one of those times where I just knew right then, oh my God, we can use this to fool ourselves and fool ourselves in the most brutal way. And, it's just, like I said, who escapes, who gets out of their teens still thinking that feelings are any meaningful indicator of anything that we value?
So I have a question, because our last episode was just a random riffing conversation about, what is the difference between the people that come across the information, have a, crisis of faith, go through the painful part of deconversion and leave the church, versus those who come across the information and just turn it away. So I know this is an impossible question to answer, but what do you think that there is a personality difference or a difference in the kind of brain of people that see this and leave and see it and just dig in?
I think, Randy, when you did that episode, I kept thinking, oh, this is the age-old nature versus nurture thing. But I'll let Brian answer now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's just, I mean, I do think obviously there's a difference in personality type, probably. There's a difference perhaps in what each individual gets from the religion. I was in it because I thought I had the truth. I was pretty sure I had the truth. I read all these amazing books. I read this stuff on the Dead Sea Scrolls and how it was so much, so much of it was like what I was doing and it seemed to go back to these ancient things. Of course, then I actually bought the Nag Hammadi Codex and read it for myself. And boy, that was a lot of cherry picking. If you're in it because you want to know the truth and you believe the truth will set you free, I think when you learn it's not true, if that was your motivation to be in it from the get-go, you're probably going to be gone. If it wasn't your motivation initially anyway, if you're in it for cultural reasons or you like this or you like that or you like the family environment kind of thing, I don't think you'll leave. I just don't. I think if you don't care about truth, you'll stay in it. My mother-in-law told me, my ex-mother-in-law told me, I don't care if it's true. It works for me. So.
Yep, I've heard that one.
Yeah, it's been going around a lot lately. Yeah, I've had that in my family too.
Yeah, so all right. Okay. Well, I couldn't live my life telling somebody that. I couldn't look myself in the mirror every morning saying I don't care about what's true. But some people can. I'm not even saying that in a judgmental way. It's just not something I could do. And that's something I think I do think I was probably born with that. I think part of it is that I had a father who was also a skeptic, a bit of a skeptic, and his favorite word in the house was bullshit. He would have loved Penn and Teller. And he didn't stand for a lot of that, and I kind of learned that from him, even though I hated him at the time. I didn't like my dad. My dad and I didn't get along at all. And ironically now, I used to be a right-wing Republican when I was super Mormon, and he was a union guy, so always voted Democrat and stuff like that. And then I became an atheist, and he was still religious, and we had some tiffs on that end. And ultimately, after my mother died, he became an atheist by reading the Bible, which I think is the number one way to do it. I came to the house one day, and he says, "Do you know what's in this thing?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, Dad. That's why I do what I do." He says, "It's just the sickest shit you've ever seen in your life, And ironically now we're lined up. He's 96 years old, and we line up perfectly. We're both atheists. We're both liberals. And
didn't you say that when you left the church, your dad was kind of pissed at you because it never occurred to him that that's something you could do?
Well, that's a joke that I tell, but I do wonder, because he was very upset. He was more upset than my mom, and I guess my mom had that comfort of thinking that, oh, if you've raised them right in the church, they'll come back or something like that. But my dad was pretty ticked off, and he was ticked off at my atheism, and he thought I was an idiot, and said so to my face, and all that kind of stuff. And I do think there was something to that. Oh shit! Why didn't I do this? 40 years ago. I do think there was something to that.
I just want to hold the divine in my mind and forget all of the beauties wasted.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Well, Randy, you mentioned a story.
Okay, so this.
I feel
right, yeah.
You need to give the context, because I don't want to just be like, tell me that.
Okay, so this will be a great Easter egg. So Brian, you gave me permission to ask you the question.
Yeah.
To ask you to tell the story. Tell the story of your mother dying, and in any way that you want.
Yeah. Okay. My mom was dying for 20 years. She had Parkinson's disease.
Oh, boy.
And when I was just about 19, it started. And, it was a mess at the beginning, because she had to go through and they had to try to figure out some kind of medication, and she was hallucinating and having a hard time. And then they got her pretty good for a while. And then she just started deteriorating again at a certain point. And so my mom was actually gone. I mean, thoroughly, completely not there. Just a shell of a human being, the physical body, and nothing there. She couldn't communicate in any way. And, my dad was 82 at the time when my mom was 80. He was carrying her around, to the bathroom, and, just he was a mensch about that whole thing. And I gained a lot of respect for him. He wasn't very good to her, but he had that kind of devotion, that generation has, even if you're not necessarily in love with someone or fond of them, they're your turtle and your lobster, and you're sticking with them come hell or high water. And there's something very valuable about that to me. And so she got really bad, and the day that she died, my dad said, I think she's going to go, because she was doing the death rattle kind of thing with the breathing and everything. But she passed away in the middle of the night, and he woke up and discovered that she was dead. And this is my dad. He just decided to go back to sleep.
Wow.
Whoa.
He just decided, she's still going to be dead in the morning. I'm tired.
You just rolled over.
I'm rolling over with a dead person in the bed and going back to sleep. And that tells you so much about my dad. That's everything you need to know. He's a character. He's one of the great characters of all time. I mean, you could literally, I could write endless stories about my dad that are all true, that would be hysterical and people would love, and just they would never stop laughing.
Is he okay with them now, or that's crazy?
He is. I mean, we don't talk about him in front of him, and my niece and my daughter, who have lived with him for quite a number of years, they have some of the best ones. I mean, it's just, but it's a never-ending source of entertainment, and really that's what you have to do with somebody like that, because if you're trying to change them, or if you're thinking that they're doing this out of some kind of malice or something, which he's not. I know he's not. It's just he's 96 years old. When he grew up, the world was much more like it was 5,000 years ago than it is today. You know what I mean? It's a whole nother world, and a way of thinking. And his father abused him, and he abused my brother and me a little bit, and I got out of a lot of it because my brother died 5 months after I was born. So he kind of rethought a lot of that stuff. He was 21 and he was on a mission at the time. And so I escaped a lot of that, not completely, but I can't really, you can't really blame him. He has, in many ways, a good heart, and he's always there if you need him. He was the guy in the church, by the way, who, if anyone ever needed anything, the bishop always knew they could call Chuck, and he would be there, day or night. He was the guy, even though he was not a strong believer in this stuff. He was the guy who was doing the work. He was doing the good stuff. So I got to hand it to him. I love him, and I respect him on certain levels, but on other levels, I know he's one crazy bastard, and he's been that way for as long as I can remember. And he's just a product of another time. It's like going into a time warp. I pass through a black hole every time I go to that house.
Yeah, well, isn't that the case for all of the apostles and prophets and all that? It's just, praise the Lord that none of them are related to me, because that would just make it all that much harder. I'm glad that everyone in my family has never gotten past a certain point of leadership, so I don't have to cross those weird lines of being more upset at them. But
So, was your dad too old to fight in World War II?
No. He went to he was in the Philippines in World War II and was training to make that landing on the Japanese homeland when we dropped the bomb.
Wow. So
he lucked out. He wouldn't have had to go if he hadn't been such an Irish Mick and opened his big mouth, because he had a deferment. He had a deferment because he was an airline mechanic. And they needed airline mechanics, but he shot his mouth off at work and lost his deferment and ended up having to go into the Army, which he loved. He said it was the best time of his life.
Yeah, that's because he didn't have to storm the beach of Japan.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of reasons why it was the best time of his life, and I won't go into that, but he shared a lot more information than I wanted to know.
You guys must be real close, because that whole him rolling over after she was dead story, I mean, the only way you could know about that is if he told you, right?
Well, yeah, but he wouldn't think of not telling me. It wouldn't even occur to him that's kind of, it's a little creepy, Dad. Oh, what the hell? If you said it was a little creepy, we'd tell, oh, what the hell? Just get the hell out of here. What's creepy about it? She was going to be dead in the morning. I'm tired.
She was mostly dead for the last little while.
Yeah, exactly. She was 99% there the last year. And I slept next to her, so.
He was probably surprised a lot of mornings when he woke up and she wasn't dead.
Yeah, and he didn't have to clean up anything more that day than he did the day before. So
I feel like such a horrible person.
It's dark.
I know. This isn't my laughter. It's somebody else's laughing.
Right. It is dark. But I mean, we were happy. It's funny. It's funny because I've never really lost anyone other than my dog recently that I really wept over, because we were so happy to see my mom go. And it was the same way with my grandmother. Both of my grandfathers were dead before I was born, because I was born so late. My father was 47, mother 45. My grandmother on my father's side, I didn't really know. They had joined the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so kicked my dad out of the family, basically, so I never saw any of them. And, it was actually a joyous thing to see my mom go finally, because it was just, I knew it was hard on my dad, and it was pointless for her to be here, and
that's why I believe in euthanasia.
Oh, yes, please, yes. We all deserve to go out on our own terms. Absolutely. I'm so for that.
My mom died very slowly, very painfully, basically of starvation, and slipped away in the middle of the night. And I was desperately trying to drive home to see her. And what a better scene it would have been if all 7 kids could have been holding hands with my dad around her.
Yep. Yeah.
All say our goodbyes.
Right.
And then let her go, release her from her pain, because she was miserable.
Well, that's what we did with my dog, and it was beautiful.
We're more humane to our dogs than we are to our human loved ones.
Yes,
wow.
Yes. And humane to ourselves. It's not just the dog. It's such a better way for us to say goodbye, and instead of putting them through all this shit, because why? I don't even know. I guess God is the only one who can take life. Yeah, just like the environment.
Right.
To help in your escape from patterns your parents design. first fake goodbye.
You've been listening to If and Stanza.